I think we're going to air now. So hello to Luke and Sherelle. We'll have more formal introductions shortly. Thank you to all the team behind the scenes who have made this ready today. But this is really great. We've got about 200 people registered for today's webinar about mindful parenting and, of course, caregiving as well, because some people are in roles of looking after children and may not see themselves as parents, but certainly caregivers. Yeah, just probably quite a few people have young children crawling on them right now, and or maybe pets on the lap and so on. So it's probably a good thing we're on webinar and we won't see all of that going on behind the cameras. But it's great to be with you both, Luke and Sherelle. Welcome.
Thanks, Craig. It's great to
Thanks,
be
Craig.
here.
Yeah. This is the first of a series of webinars we're going to be running throughout this year. So the first Thursday of the month from 12 to 1. So we welcome everybody to today's webinar, and we very much welcome everybody to log on for upcoming webinars throughout the year. So this first one is a topic, I think, which is close to a lot of people's heart for lots of different reasons. So we've got two wonderful experts in lots of ways to talk about mindful parenting today. Luke Smith, a neuropsychologist, Sherelle Connaughton, who's a psychologist as well. Both got PhDs, MDs, but you're not here so much for your academic qualifications as for your outstanding expertise as mindful parents. Now, we're going to, of course, discuss how being a mindful parent is not about being perfect all the time. So it's about being human in possibly one of the most demanding kinds of jobs we're ever given in day-to-day life. So we're going to be hearing and also about, we'll come to it later on, but about the wonderful course that the two of you have put together, which I think a lot of participants today will be very interested in. So welcome to you both. Perhaps just say a little bit, Luke, just by way of introduction first, perhaps a little bit about yourself and why have you got an interest in this area?
Thanks, Craig. It's fantastic to be here today. And I got to say, when you said parenting expert, I vomited in my mouth a little bit there, which I am definitely not. So I'm a neuropsychologist by training. But I have always had a passion and an interest more recently in my life, actually, since I became a parent, in mindfulness. I've got two boys, both aged under 10, who, along with my family, the loves of my life. But I think why I was attracted to consider sort of how mindfulness and parenting work together is simply because you don't get a manual when you become a parent, at least one that I don't know of. So if anyone does know of a manual, please send it through my way.
There's probably a few books that have been written on the subject.
That's right. But parenting is both the most, or caregiving is the most incredible but challenging experience you can have. And I think, everyone parents slightly differently, and mindfulness is just one tool of many that we can use to consider how we want to be as parents, how we want to be interacting with our children, what sort of care we want to give. So I think that it's just one tool, but fortunately it is a tool that is really well researched, has a lot of evidence behind it. It's pretty practical in how we use it. And I have found both personally and professionally, both as a neuropsychologist and as a parent, it to be incredibly useful, incredibly rewarding, and maybe uncomfortable sometimes when you realize some of your own habits you carry around as a parent.
We'll come to your habits shortly, Luke.
Yeah. So that's definitely why I became interested in the area.
Yeah. Yes. Sherelle, what about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I just want to add, I was also smiling when you mentioned experts in mindful parenting. I was kind of thinking, just like it's very hard to be an expert in mindfulness generally, we're all works in progress here. We've been learning, we've been looking at the research as well. So we've got some ideas that we know that can help a lot of people, but each family is different and unique, and each child has individual needs that you kind of need to really tune into. And that's where the mindfulness comes in. But for me, my journey definitely started in mindfulness generally as a young adult. adult, sort of, 30 years ago. So well before I became a parent. So it was something I'd always been doing. And just to share a little aside, I had a really regular practice. I'd do sort of, a half an hour meditation. I'd do an hour and a half of yoga every morning. I'd do breathing practices. I'd do meditation again at night. And I'd been doing that for 2 decades. And then I had my first child, and the routine had just kind of, well, where do you have time to do this when you've got a newborn? And I really had to restructure my mindfulness practice around my parenting. And it very much brought me into, it's not just the sitting and the meditating, it is being mindful in the present moment, whatever that is throwing up at you in the family situation. So yes, it's definitely been very dear to my heart, this topic of mindful parenting, because as Luke said, it's such an important role in any parent or caregiver's life, looking after a young person.
Yeah, wonderful. And sorry for setting those expectations so high and calling you both experts. And I kind of had a hunch how much you would not like that, because certainly one thing about mindfulness makes us aware of our own humanity. So I'm going to be putting some questions to you, that the kinds of questions I suspect that people on this webinar would be interested to put. But we're also going to welcome questions from participants. If you want to put something in the chat, among each other, that's all very well. But the Q&A, if you'd like a question put to Luke and or Sherelle, then please put it in the Q&A, and we'll try and get to those as we go as well. So I guess the first question, although we've kind of already hinted at it a bit, but what is mindful parenting? And perhaps even to put it in a more immediate context, why do we need it now? Like, is there a greater need for mindful parenting now than there was 10, 20, 30 years ago? So what is it, and why do we need it now?
I might take the first part of the question, if that's okay, Sherelle, and then I'll throw to you. So mindfulness is an ability or a skill that we are all born with. And it's a natural way that our mind works, or as a neuropsychologist, your brain works, and your mind is an extension of that. It's the capacity to be able to cultivate the ability to be present, to be able to pay attention in the present moment to what's happening around you or within you, and to do that in a non-judgmental way. And as you do that, as you are able to cultivate that ability, you do start to develop an awareness of things, awareness of yourself, awareness of what's going on around you as well. So we know that mindfulness can be applied to many different things, but particularly in the parenting area and the caregiving area, what we're really looking at doing is mindfulness is a tool or something that we can learn that has lots of different benefits. And that's something we explore during the course. So part of it is understanding yourself as a parent or caregiver, how you respond to situations, what the triggers might be for your stress, any narratives or storylines that you carry around about yourself as a parent, such as, I must be that kind of parent and I should be able to do that. And because my mum or dad did that, I should be doing that. All those sort of storylines we carry around with us. And then also, really, to put it basically, being present for the young people, or as I've been challenged by parents with older kids, they tell me, you never stop being a parent, even though I've got a 40-year-old son. It's being able to be present with what's happening with them in the moment, rather than distracted and caught up in lots of mind wandering that we kind of, what happens for us. Research shows that almost half the time we are distracted by what's going on in our heads, whether it's worrying about the future or that to-do list we have to get done, whether it's thinking about the past, regretting something that's just happened, or allowing those things in the past really to control what we're doing now. So cultivating that ability to be able to pay attention in the present moment has benefits for us as parents and caregivers, our interaction with the young people that we care for. And then also what research shows, which is quite interesting, is that through modeling, almost through cultivating this ability and showing this way of interacting and approaching things, that it might be also that the young people we care for start to pick up on that a bit. So that can be really beneficial as well. Yeah,
modeling's so important, is it? Because many people think, oh, teaching mindfulness is sitting down and educating specifically, but by what we model, we're we could be teaching it all the time without even being conscious that we're teaching it. Modeling is so important, especially for very young children.
And a really basic example of that, Craig, before I throw to Sherelle, is one thing that I seek to do, which is a really great thing that Sherelle was talking about at the start, is that mindfulness is not just about meditating, it's also about attempting to be mindful in our day-to-day lives. My boys have just gone back to school, and as usual, that busyness that's reintroduced into our lives and all the complex social things they're working at in their new classes. This morning, my son couldn't get his shoelaces undone. For whatever reason, he tied them too tight. And I think he was already feeling a bit nervous about going to school. And he's sitting there fiddling with them. I could see him getting agitated, and I'm getting agitated because we need to get to school. And what I loved is he then just took a really deep breath and he looked down at his shoe and he started again and he got it done. And that might be a really basic example, but I know that when I am trying to be mindful, what I do is I try to pause or try to check in with what I'm doing. And often I do that through a breath or two. So it's a pretty basic example, but it was one of those moments when, oh, hang on a second, he's actually starting to do what I do a bit.
Yeah, excellent. Now, the other part of that question, Sherelle, was why now? Like, do you think that there is a greater need for mindfulness in parenting now than perhaps with what people were dealing with in previous generations?
It's a great question, Craig. And I'll be honest, I think mindful parenting has always been relevant and always been needed, every generation. But in today's very busy modern world, we know that, a lot of parents are really juggling being a parent, managing work. The classic 40-hour work was really designed to have one person in the family doing that and another person that was home kind of caring. And when you're trying to juggle both of those things and splitting roles with a partner, or maybe you're working as a single parent or maybe you're co-parenting with someone in a different household, it can get really complex, just the parenting side of things. But also, I think today's era of distraction, the mobile phone technology, the mobile devices, it's a really big challenge both for parents and for children. I often see parents at the park that are scrolling. I once saw a parent sitting in the car working on the laptop while the child was by themselves in the playground. We were a little bit stunned, but I assume that parent had a deadline that they just had to meet. This child was just craving attention and joined into my little group that I was looking after that day. But juggling that distraction is really difficult, and the competing demands that people have, I think, has increased from certainly my parents' generation or my grandparents' generation and beyond. And I think too, the distraction even in the children, if they're spending a lot of time on screens, we've got to work even harder sometimes to make those connections when they're sort of getting distracted as well. So I think it's particularly relevant now, but has been relevant always, definitely.
Yeah, and especially since COVID and a lot of work from home and technology went to the next level in terms of the way that it not just being used at work, but it invaded the home space. Many people working from home.
Definitely.
And I suppose parts of family life. So, the meal around the meal table, for example, the interacting at the end of a school day, many of these things are being done vicariously through a screen or while scrolling the phone and so on. So the technology in many ways is kind of invaded itself into the home space, which makes this, I dare say, far more complex and challenging.
Yeah, definitely. And COVID was a big game changer for our family. My daughter was, very sort of screen free as a little one, and occasionally we started to watch like a family movie. But then COVID sort of hit, and she was in grade 3, and she had to spend most of her school day sort of on a screen in meetings, email. She'd never sent an email before, and she was suddenly having to do a lot of that. And interesting how once that sort of started, then there's the group chat from the students, and then you're kind of managing that sort of side of things as well. And my daughter's now starting high school, and I'm recognizing, having kept her screen free for a long time, it is a really key way for a lot of young people to contact their friends and be in touch as well. So it's another area to kind of manage, hopefully in a mindful way. But it does make things a little bit more challenging. I think it was easier when we didn't have the screens available quite so present.
So we might come back and chat more about technology and maybe some of the guidelines or boundaries to set around that. But just something that you've both already hinted at as well in my overblown introduction and expert parents and so on. But this kind of idea generally, and it can get imported into mindfulness practice, sitting down, learning meditation practice. I've got to be a perfect, meditator. I've got to be in the moment all the time. What's wrong with me? Quite often we import some pretty negative or harsh attitudes into our practice of mindfulness. I suspect that comes into parenting as well, so mindfulness being all about greater awareness, but all of a sudden we start to notice our reactions, we start to notice our habits, etc. And we might see stuff that we don't necessarily like or find particularly comfortable. So is being a mindful parent about being a perfect parent, or is it being about an authentic parent, or just learning to be more human and gentler with ourselves rather than harsher with ourselves?
Look, it's a really great question, Craig. And in fact, I think when we first sort of started designing this course, there were so many cautions and premises at the start and disclaimers around, this is not about being a perfect parenting. There is so much opinion and both in the media and social media and even with our own groups, our own friendship groups, our family groups, about what you should and shouldn't be as a parent. And mindful parenting is not about saying, I'm going to be present all the time for my kids. I'm going to cook them the perfect healthy muffins, in their lunches. It's actually, I think the latter is what you're talking about. It's interesting. Research shows is that when you become a parent or caregiver, and I'm not just talking about a biological parent having a child, I'm talking about grandparents, neighbors, foster parents, all the rich and different ways that we view family and caregiving. There's actually natural processes that happen for us within our brain, the way that we think, the way we approach things, the level of compassion. We are kind of through evolution hardwired in many ways to do that. And in some ways, I think that through cultivating mindfulness, when we're parenting and when we're caregiving, we are in some ways unlocking those natural abilities that we have, as well as being aware of any habits of mind that we carry around. So it's definitely not about being a perfect parent. And I think Sherelle and I have discussed this, but one of the side effects of designing and running this course is a lot of imposter syndrome, because I have moments still with my boys where I'm less than proud of maybe how I reacted or what I did in that situation. But it's learning to let go of that and learning then to bring my attention back to the present again. And as I said, it's not just about the benefits for the young people we care for or the older people we care for, but it's also benefits for ourselves, about understanding ourselves. I remember there's a great Bluey episode, which is one of my favorite shows when the boys were younger, where Chili the mum goes to a parents group, a mum's group, and her daughter is bum shuffling rather than walking at the time, and she starts comparing herself to the other parents and the other kids, and what am I doing wrong? And so that normal judgment that we have, and then fortunately in the end, all that stuff doesn't matter. So I think we have to be really careful actually about being perfect parents and maybe considering ourselves just to be good enough.
Mm. Yeah. I remember an example. It wasn't a mindful parenting course, it was just a mindfulness course, but one of the participants was a psychologist, and she had a newborn. She was breastfeeding one night, woken up in the middle of the night. She was breastfeeding, and she was sitting there, I'm going to be so tired in the morning, and etc. So she was caught up in her mind, but all of a sudden she remembered to be mindful and present. So just really connected with the present moment and that experience, with her baby. All of a sudden she said what was irritation, frustration became a sense of love and connection with her baby. But what she said next was very interesting. Moments after this sort of sense of connection and love, this dialogue started up in her mind. Oh, how dare I be resentful of being up in the middle of the night? Oh, I'm a terrible parent for not, and it was like a play on another mental commentary. And in many ways, that seemed like the next step into mindfulness was to actually be aware of diving into that commentary of self-criticism, etc. Sherelle, you got any reflections on that, because we can go from being mindful to being unmindful back and forth very quickly.
Very, very quickly, definitely. And I do love the commentary on top of the commentary. I mean, our mind is just so beautifully creative and can do so many different things that we do need to just stop and pause, as Luke said before, and just come back to, okay, what does my child need right now in this moment? And what do I need right now in this moment as well? And I think, you know, for me, it's not that perfection. It's very much the authenticity and finding that connection. And it's not that we can be 100% connected every minute of the day. We need to do things. Children need to be independent. They need to kind of learn, okay, I'm coming back to Bluey. There was an episode where mum just needed 15 minutes, just 15 minutes. So, and teaching some of those boundaries. I see a questions come up a bit about boundaries for older children as well, that, you know, we want to encourage our children to be more resilient. You know, we can't help them every challenge that they kind of have. We need to find some space. But, you know, those very little ones, you know, those babies, when they're crying, it's an unmet need there. You know, when frustration happens, when the child's struggling and getting frustrated and grumpy, there's an unmet need there. So we need to really stop and tune into, you know, what is that? And usually it's a need for connection just underlies it almost all the time. Sometimes there's anxiety and other things as well going on. It might be anger, but if the child is feeling connected, then all of that just settles and moves into, you know, okay, I'm frustrated about this, but I can manage it, you know, as Luke gave with his example with the shoelaces before. It's this is difficult, but, you know, for him, he was actually able to just do it himself, reconnect with himself and breathe. But I think for some children, particularly younger children, they need that presence of a caring adult that can just help. You've got to be the calm in their storm when they're feeling anxious, upset, frustrated. You know, you're adding to that doesn't help at all. So very much, you know, watching your reactions and what the child needs at that time, I think, is key.
Yeah. Now there are some questions that have popped up in the Q&A, so we might just have a look at one of those now. So Kim, my offspring turned 18 last year, and the relationship transition has been interesting as society considers them an adult. I do try to be mindful, but I may be overthinking it as my communication seems unclear to them. My question is, what boundaries do you recommend for older kids?
I think it's a really good question. And, you know, when we talk about parenting, which we touched on before, or caregiving, is that it doesn't discriminate based on age. You know, you could have a one day old, and you could have, such as for Kim, you know, a child transitioning into adulthood. And I guess that the sort of premise of mindful parenting, when you look at how we use it, it's not to say that there's any one way to parent. So, for example, with mindful parenting, you wouldn't necessarily say, well, these are the key boundaries you need to set in place, Kim, to have perfect success in what you're doing as a parent. You know, part of what we talk about is that as our relationships change with our kids due to circumstance or due to them getting older or us getting older, it's about practicing that awareness or bringing our attention back to the present moment. There's an awareness that grows from that. So it might be that, for example, as your child is getting older, you notice that the same way you used to communicate with them doesn't work as it used to. And therefore, you might actually then consider experimenting with different ways of communicating. And then what the mindfulness will be able to do if you practice it, and this does take time, by the way, we're not talking about something you can just do overnight, is that you may then notice their nonverbal reactions to the way that you're now communicating with them, whether they're showing you they're listening and paying attention to what you're saying, or whether they're switching off really quickly. You may also then notice how you're reacting to them, whether you feel like your communication is cutting through or whether it's authentic enough. Because when you're experimenting with new ways of communicating with your kids, like, it is an experiment, and mindfulness is a vehicle through which you can then judge your own reactions, their reactions to it. One of the really things that struck home with me, one of those really clear things when you distill all these things down, and Sherelle touched on it before, is that mindfulness can cultivate our ability to respond to a situation rather than react. So rather than just reacting on any emotion or thought or impulse or whatever is going through our mind at that time, it gives us that pause, the ability to be able to reflect on a situation and then respond, or in this way differently maybe, to what we're going through. And then also being aware, as parents, and then the judgments we pile on ourselves, like that example you provided, Craig, about judging yourself for being judgmental about a situation with a baby. It might also be then noticing that it's okay to feel challenged in these big transitional years when our kids are changing and our relationship is changing with them. Maybe even having a sense of grief that those little people are now changing into bigger people and don't need us as much. We all go through different journeys as parents. So my comment would be, I don't think that mindful parenting is about a specific boundary and the perfect way of doing things. It's maybe a vehicle for which we can try different things and then notice, does that change the way we react to each other? Does that change the nature of our relationship?
Sherelle, anything you wanted to add to that?
Uh, no, not so much. I was looking ahead to the next question that Jason has shared about, should we be restricting access to screen and smart technology? There's certainly a lot of research that is showing, particularly social media can have some quite problematic effects emotionally, particularly in girls, but also family functioning in both males and females. But we know just excessive screen time, just straight TV time, just a big problem with that is just being sedentary and not getting out there and being creative and moving. So there's lots of issues around weight, well-being, even motor and cognitive development. So there are some guidelines that are given, sort of no screen time for children younger than 2 years is part of the Australian guidelines, no more than 1 hour a day for children aged 2 to 5, and no more than 2 hours of sedentary recreational screen time for young people aged 5 to 17, but not including schoolwork, because obviously many kids are doing a lot of schoolwork online these days and in front of a screen. So that one is difficult. Even, homework requirements can easily be 2 hours a night for people in high school, particularly later years and more. So we need to be able to keep people moving. In terms of restricting access, as I mentioned before, I do know it's important for education and it's important for social connections to have some access. We, as I mentioned before, we were quite screen free with my daughter and we noticed everyone knew the Frozen movie and the characters, and our daughter kind of didn't. So we'd often find books of the movies and we'd sort of talk about them. And it worked for a little while, certainly into, certainly right through sort of kindergarten and into primary school. But then we really needed her to be connecting with her peers on these things. So we did start having more access to that, but very much we made it, it was sort of like a family thing that we sat down together. I sometimes visit houses and I see the television on, it's just in the background during breakfast or getting ready for school. I'm like, no, we don't need that sort of, if we can make it meaningful time, if the child is connecting with somebody else, whether that be a friend, if they're watching something with a family member or with a friend, it's much more meaningful than just stuck on a screen scrolling hours on end by themselves. So it's not so much restricting access. I think it's good to delay it as long as you can, because once you've kind of opened up that pathway, it's harder to put the lid back on and put the genie back in the bottle once we're sort of open to all of that mobile technology. But definitely, putting some limits around it and making sure that it's got a clear purpose. It's not just something that's, I'm bored, I'm just going to watch the screen. What are some other things that you can do if you're bored? Try and get the child moving, make them aware of the challenges of sitting. Can you set a timer for once an hour? You've got to get up and move, those sorts of things can be helpful. So some kind of limits, but I certainly, total restriction is hard in today's modern life. Yeah.
Yes. Well, one of the concerns, of course, is that when it blows out, it's overused, that it starts to replace other things, as you mentioned, physical activity. For many children, sleep. If they have access to their technology when they're meant to be getting to sleep, and the light from the screen affects the hormones that regulate sleep and so on, then that has impacts for concentration and learning at school the next day. It also has impacts for mental health as well. So yes, as you said, a certain amount to a healthy extent, and using it for meaningful purposes as well.
Yes. And Craig, I wanted to add to that, having limitations at night time. I haven't seen research on this, but certainly anecdotally, I remember the principal of my daughter's primary school making it very clear that the only times she really had to intervene in friendship issues among the students in her class, they almost all were to do with chat, social communication, almost always happening at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. Those phones need to not be in the bedrooms. They need to be charged outside of the bedrooms. We need to have, my daughter has a very clear limit of when the phone needs to be off, and we don't have it at dinner time and things like that. So some limits around that are really important. Sleep's key.
Just coming back to the previous question as well, about having a child that is all of a sudden a young adult, and that sort of transition and somebody becoming independent. I remember an example being given again in a mindfulness course, and a woman who had, she was a single mother, very concerned about adolescent, sort of late adolescent son who was withdrawing more and communicating less, and is he getting up to problems? So there was a lot of care, a lot of love, but how it came across in the conversations were, is everything all right? Tell me what's going on. And it came across in a kind of a pressured way. And she gave an example one time of a mindful moment. She was about to walk into his room, but she had a little pause before she put her hand on the doorknob to just stop, because what she was aware of in that moment was she was about to take a whole attitude into that room, a whole lot of anxiety. And she said what happened in that moment, she was about to walk in, she just, because letting go was one of the things we were exploring, she said, I just let go of any expectation or attitude to prejudice the conversation with. So she let that go. She stepped in, but stepped into the room in a different way. And all of a sudden she found herself just opening up a different conversation of just how things going. There was no expectation or no anxiety. It was just like how things going. And it opened up the opportunity to have that first kind of conversation. Can you say a little bit about how mindfulness helps us to manage our own emotions, but how does it help us to engage in a different kind of communication to the one that we're often unconsciously and habitually caught up in?
We touched on before that, throughout any time in history, being a parent or caregiver can have challenges. But as Sherelle pointed out, we know from research, we are increasingly distracted by the technology that we use. And I think that one of the things that occurs, particularly in a really busy life, is that you run on autopilot. You have all your ducks lined up and they all need to be knocked down before the end of the day. And I think in some ways we can take that habit into the way when we're interacting with our kids. We can just go into autopilot, which means we're really not necessarily paying attention. I think my son calls it download listening. That's the term he likes to use when people are going to assume he's about to say something because maybe that's what he said in the past. So it does allow us to become aware of our own habits. And by habits, I mean the ways that we approach different situations with our kids. And being able to find that ability to be able to pause, to be able to be present, to be able to respond rather than react. Like in that situation or the example you provide, Craig, you can do it in a more considered way, a more creative way. The word that a lot of the parents and caregivers we've had in the course before says they start to trust their intuition more. So as all the chatter starts to settle down and all the shoulds and coulds and worries start to settle a little bit, and you're able to be a bit more present by paying attention to what's happening, they start to trust their intuition a little bit more, that other way that we can think and feel our way through situations. So yeah, and can I say one of the myths about mindful parenting is that suddenly you become laissez-faire parent, meaning you just let kids do whatever they want and you never raise your voice and you're never firm. That's not actually the point of this whole thing.
Somebody says, I've really let go as a parent now. I've really let go.
Yeah, they just let them do what they want. Yeah, that's not mindful parenting, because you're not actually paying attention in that present moment to what is required in the situation. So it may be slightly shocking to hear, but you can still be a firm parent and do it mindfully. You can actually decide to be very clear in the way that you are discussing a situation, including a consequence of a situation that you're concerned might happen, or you can still do that, but you do it rather than just reactive impulsively to this feeling of anger or feeling of worry coming up in me. You're aware of that feeling, but then you respond in the kind of way that you want, in a conscious way of choosing. So it's not about suddenly like everything becomes easy and the kids do whatever they want, it all works out. We all parent in different ways. it's about doing that in a conscious way rather than being on autopilot, being distracted, acting, feeling, and then regretting it afterwards. I mean, guilt is a parent's best friend in many ways. I don't know what, a lot of the parents and caregivers I speak to just talk about this feeling constantly of guilty, of not feeling like they're doing well at anything. And I think that's often because we're simply just responding on autopilot rather than being present. One example I'd like to provide before I hand it back to you, Craig, is that my son was going through a particularly hard time during lockdowns. He'd only been in school for 2 or 3 years in primary school, and he was really missing his friends. And I've been talking to him about days, and I just had one of those moments when I realized we're about to talk about it, and his nonverbals told me he'd switched off straight away. He didn't even want to talk to me about it. So I stopped talking. My mindful response was literally just to sit with him in the same room, with the uncomfortable silence that was there, with the worries I had about his well-being at the time, because my intuition was telling me, he's too used to you talking about this all the time. Why don't you just sit with him and do whatever he's doing, but not say a word? And sure enough, 5 or 10 minutes, he just started to talk about what was happening for him. I wasn't trying to solve his problems. I wasn't trying to fix the issue. I wasn't making him feel guilty because he wasn't coping well. It was actually giving him the time and space. So that's what I mean by sometimes that response rather than just a reaction to what's happening in the situation.
Yes, it's very much of the moment. I mean, it sounds like you can't really be, sort of strategy orientated. Oh, if you're in this situation, you do 1, 2, 3, and then everything all works out well. Because what might be needed in one situation, if you're really present, could be very different to another situation, what it means to be mindful in that moment. But it sounds very conscious, very aware, and a kind of a level of discernment that comes into the situation.
That's definitely key, Craig. And coming back to Kim's question, I think you addressed that really well with your example, and Luke then as well, creating that space for the child to sort of, or the young person, it might be a teenager or a young adult. What we're bringing to the table is just really important. So really keeping our emotions in check is really key. Something else I found sometimes is, there might be a problem to sort of come into the room and sit down and, talk in the room is sort of one thing, but, maybe it's it can feel a bit confronting. It's kind of where I'm coming here because we're going to talk about this. I like Luke's approach of just sitting down and doing what they were doing. Joining in might work. I have found with older kids, my nephews when they were teenagers, and even with my grandmother when she was going through some difficult times, sometimes going for a walk. There's something about being side by side with someone, sometimes even driving in the car. Just one day, my grandmother really opening up about some family challenges she was experiencing, and I have a feeling that if we'd sat down face to face, that would be different. Another one was just washing the dishes, and my 18-year-old nephew started talking about some things that were sort of quite challenging. And it's like, yeah, we're side by side. One's washing, one's drying, and sometimes just being in someone's presence can be a great opportunity to sort of open it up, but we don't have to be, sitting down face to face to have that conversation. Sometimes there's something about side to side can work for challenging situations, I've found.
Well, through art, people often describe, sometimes through drawing and something else can start to have a conversation and expression. So there are many different ways of exploring it, but I dare say we can relate to this ourselves when we were young. But sometimes if an adult sort of turns the attention fully towards you and like what's wrong, it's a very confronting thing because one may not know, like as a child or an adolescent, you're not quite sure. You can't, even if you've got a sense something's going, you're not able to put it into words very eloquently. And it's quite a confronting thing. That sort of self-consciousness makes it even more so. So I dare say sometimes the mindful thing is just to just give a little bit more space and to approach it in perhaps a different, more creative way.
And definitely, as the people we're looking after are getting older, I think that's really key. We need them to be taking the initiative, letting us know when they just need a listening ear, when they are actually wanting some problem solving, not just diving in and trying to fix everything. You can easily miss what the issue is if you dive in too quickly.
Yeah. With with everything these days, and a lot of things in relation to mindfulness, is it just a matter of people saying things or teaching things in mindful parenting that kind of sound good, or in my experience, or is there also a body of research as well that kind of confirms that learning the principles of mindfulness can be helpful in any walk of life, but particularly can be brought to bear in parenting? So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, as I mentioned at the start, in this world where we have so many opinions and experts about parenting, that having the confidence of whatever we're learning has some evidence that it's going to have benefit to ourselves, to our families, the young people we care for, our relationships. So within research, the research field now, there's been some really big meta-analytic and review studies, which is where they take lots of smaller studies and take big data sets, apply some quality criteria to the data they're getting, and then analyze it. And there's definitely consistent outcomes that they show that are benefits. But what I also like about the research, which is where there's not too much bias and they're not trying to sell too much, is that they also say what mindful parenting won't do, which I think is really important too. And I think particularly when we're faced by really challenging periods in our life, whether as parents or in the background when we're parents and caregivers, we are looking for the magic fix. We are looking for the top 5 strategies that will solve all my parenting issues. Mindful parenting is not about that. It's about a general skill set we can learn that we can then apply flexibly to different situations. So, for example, it does show that it does, hopefully, and it does, increase our capacity to be mindful parents. And what I mean by that is being present more often with our kids. It does appear to improve communication, particularly also emotional communication, the way we respond to each other emotionally. It does appear to show that modeling behavior, where we are modeling how we work with our emotions, how we work with our thinking and our challenging situations. That modeling does seem to transfer, which is fantastic. There does appear to be some evidence, although it's probably not as convincing as the other areas, that it does help our kids emotionally cope to a better degree with challenging situations. But obviously, it doesn't take away those challenging situations. Like us, our kids are always going to face that. The research shows that there isn't evidence to say that learning mindful parenting will then improve our spousal partnerships or our partnerships, or those if we're co-parenting with other people. It won't necessarily solve any issues we might be having in those relationships. But I was very quickly, when I reviewed that, thinking, well, that's not what it's about. This is not about mindful partnerships. This is about mindful parenting. And what I'd also say is that most of this research shows that the effects of these things are mild to moderate. So what I mean by that is that this is a useful tool that we can use when we're parenting and in our relationships with our kids, but it's not necessarily the thing. Like, it's not the magical cure that's going to make you the perfect parent. It's a skill set that will have effect some of the time, and it is a useful tool. I think, sorry, Craig.
I was just going to say, those overall outcomes, there'll be a big variety. Some people might learn mindfulness, not apply it much, not get much benefit from it. Some people might learn it and really, take it much deeper and get much greater effects. An overall result's always an average. And I guess it's the factors that really help somebody to apply it well and deeply in their lives, that are going to have the biggest effect.
Yeah, and so a lot of this research is based on prolonged courses, kind of like the thing that we've designed as well, which is based on those principles. It's saying that the more that you practice it, which makes total sense, the more that you use your mind muscle, the stronger it gets. So the more that we practice it, generally it's ingrained. And it does show that over a period of time, once people go through those courses, those positive effects tend to stay there.
Yeah.
Which is great.
I just wanted to put a question, perhaps, Sherelle, you could answer this. Like, mindfulness increases awareness, so we notice stuff about ourselves, our reactions that sometimes we don't like or we find uncomfortable. And we have a human moment, overreact to something or whatever happens. What would be the mindful thing to do when we've overreacted or we've expressed something very poorly, or in some way we feel like we've let ourselves down and how we've responded? What sort of things are going to be helpful in that situation?
Sure, Craig. It's definitely, the first thing is to be able to recognize that that's happened, because quite often that's happening, but we can get stuck in that for quite some time before we realize we've gotten into that. So the first step is to recognize it. And that's probably the most challenging one, because once you have recognized it, almost invariably, there's going to be a moment where you just kind of stop, pause, breathe, and then think about a better way of doing it. It's nice. A nice coping strategy is just to sort of, for any activity that we're doing, is this helping me be where I want to be, or is it stopping me be where I want to be, achieve what I kind of want to achieve? I find that's really key. So particularly when I'm recognizing, an example might be, oh, I'm getting frustrated again. We're taking way too long to get out the door to school again. I think that's a common one that a lot of parents are kind of dealing with. We need to catch ourselves, that frustration, because that frustration is not helping our young person get ready and get to the bus or the car or wherever they need to get to school. We've got to keep our own emotions in check very much, but we also need to, if this is happening every day, we need to change the structure around it. We need to try things really differently. Allow more buffer time. Buffer time is definitely a key thing in our house. But my daughter's not quick in getting going, so we always need a bit more time to sort of get out of the house, and then a bit more time to allow for issues with the traffic. But when we recognise that, we really have made a mistake here, and we've gotten overly frustrated or something like that, I think it's really important, as you said, we're having a human moment, recognizing this is a human moment. There's something about that recognition of common humanity. Kristen Neff's work around self-compassion, mindfulness combined with common humanity can really just help us settle and take a moment. Okay, really frustrated, but I can do this differently, and just sort of reset and keep moving is really key. Yeah.
Because, we often think on mindfulness so much about attention and being present and so on, but always underpinning it is this kind of attitude of gentleness, the kind of compassion with which we notice the things we're noticing for ourselves and for others.
And again, role modeling that for our child. So when they're having difficulty with something, what can they do? Can they reset? Oh, we all have trouble with our shoelaces sometimes. I'm just going to try that again. It's a really important skill, this just being able to pause, and as Luke summarised so nicely before, this idea of responding in a more thoughtful way rather than just emotionally reacting to the situation is key.
Right. Well, we're just about drawing to, we've got just a few minutes to go. And look, honestly, I could keep throwing questions to you two all day. And there'll be a lot of people on this webinar today, this seminar, who would love to learn more as well. So just in a minute or two, Luke, this coming up is the Mindful Parenting course that you and Sherelle have been working on. Can you just tell us a few things about that, in a minute or two?
Yeah, sure. So this is an online course that we're launching on the 4th of March. The course is based on all this research around how do we apply mindful parenting, how do we learn it. We've actually been running it in a face-to-face way and changing it and evolving it and molding it at Monash University with staff. So it does have a lot of background, not from just a research point of view, but for practically how this sort of works. After an introduction, it's basically run over 4 weeks or 4 units. And it covers a range of different topics, some of which we discussed today, but it really is also a course that's practically oriented. It is about learning skills, learning how not to treat yourself as a perfect parent. It's not based in pie in the sky ideals about what you should and shouldn't be as a parent. So we're hoping that it really does apply to and benefit, but also appeal to a range of parents and caregivers, and however we define them.
Yeah. Well, I do highly commend this course, not just because all the evaluation that's come in from the people who've already done it, but for because of everything I know about you, Luke, and you, Sherelle, that you very much, walk the walk. You just don't talk the talk. You can bring so much to what you do every day in your work. So thank you both very much for sharing so much today. Thank you to everybody who joined the today's seminar. The next one's coming up on March 7, so again at midday. Kevin Berryman, and so he's a Buddhist monk, but he's also doing a PhD here at Monash with a particular focus on does meditation help us to make us more moral or ethical people, or doesn't it? So we're going to be exploring some rather big questions next time. So thank you both once again, Luke and Sherelle. Thank you to all our participants today. We'll look forward to seeing you in the next seminar.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, Craig. It's been a pleasure.